Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I've learned so much from our speakers already, so I feel very honored to have been invited. And it's an honor to speak on behalf of the Native Land Conservancy. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Native Land Conservancy is an Indigenous-led land conservation group. And by Indigenous-led, I mean that we're guided by this incredible board of directors, who are all tribal citizens coming from 5 tribal groups: the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe, Aquinnah Wampanoag tribe, the Nipmuc Nation, and Narragansett Nation. And it's really important to note that we're tribally diverse. We're separate from a tribal government as a nonprofit, and we are guided by their collective traditional knowledge and values. And we also have a small but growing staff who helps enact our vision. There's a familiar face in there. Of course, you heard earlier today from Chief Earl Mills Jr., who we're lucky enough to have on our team as our land care manager. But each person on this slide brings a unique set of skills to the work and makes it possible for us to enact our mission to protect and restore land for all living beings wherever possible. And by wherever possible, I mean wherever possible. We are based in Mashpee, right here on Cape Cod, of course, but we actually operate in 3 states, currently protecting over 1,500 acres of land through different means. We hold the deed to land, seen in green, admittedly not great, and I'm sorry, it looks like there was some outlines that didn't carry over on this slide, but you can see that we predominantly operate in Massachusetts and in southeastern Massachusetts. We also hold conservation restrictions to land, which would be the purple dots, and we also hold cultural respect easements on land, which is in the orange. And so for those of you who may not have heard of what a cultural respect easement is, I just want to briefly say that this is a legally binding mechanism to ensure that Indigenous people have access to their ancestral homelands for cultural practice. And this is just one of many legal tools to uphold Aboriginal rights and ensure those intrinsic rights are honored. But it's one way that we can ensure that Indigenous people have safe passage in their ancestral homelands. And of course, there's a lot of different reasons we want to see that happen. Of course, cultural continuity is one reason. As you learned earlier today in the plenary opening remarks, Indigenous cultures are land-based, and so these land bases are essential to cultural preservation. Of course, also justice. It's just the right thing to do, and it offers opportunities for repair and healing. And also there are direct benefits for the land. And I want to say these are not mutually exclusive reasons to uphold cultural access. And these are not the only reasons, but just at a high level today with the 15 minutes I have, I wanted to touch on those ways of ensuring there's cultural access for Indigenous people. And there's many other things that the Native Land Conservancy does, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on and focus on that last point of cultural practices in the land. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by how do cultural practices have direct benefits to the land? Well, there are a lot. So we know that these landscapes have been shaped for millennia by Indigenous people and tribes. Here on the Cape, there's archaeological evidence and oral history that supports the Wampanoag's presence here for over 12,000 years. And this can take a range of different impacts that we can still see on the land. Whether it's the Cherokee, Anishinaabe, and many other tribes that have stewarded their forests, or agroforestry as we sometimes think of it, to promote nut tree production, or the ancestral Hohokam, pardon, irrigation and canal waterways that redistributed surface water across the Southwest. And also in the Great Plains and other places as well. Of course, we see tribes like the Lakota and Blackfeet that are managing their landscapes for habitat for species that they're hunting. So these practices have persisted for millennia, and their impacts are still seen today. So when we think of restoring a natural balance to these ecosystems, it is absolutely essential that we also restore the people and cultural practices that are indigenous to these lands. And today I'm going to focus on just one of those cultural practices, which is fire. And this can take a lot of different lenses that it could be approached from. In indigenous tradition, we think of cultural burns. And in Western land management, we think of prescribed burns. And there are a lot of similarities, and they can look similar on a static screen. On the upper right-hand side there, you have a cultural burn led by the Mono tribe in California. And on the bottom right-hand, you have a prescribed burn led by the Nature Conservancy in Texas. And so while the outcomes of these can have similar impacts, it is important to note that the framing and lens is very different. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but with a cultural burn, this is a spiritual ceremony. It's multi-generational with long time scales, and the focus is really renewal for the land and relationship to the land. Whereas often in prescribed burns, we're looking at quantifiable things like reducing fire load and things like that. And here at the Native Land Conservancy, we're very excited this year to return fire to the landscape, starting with one site in particular. And that is the Wampanoag Common Lands, which is actually located in Kingston, so taking you a little off Cape for a minute here. This is 32.4 acres that were donated to the Native Land Conservancy to hold on behalf of the Wampanoag Nation. And by that, I mean just that. The Native Land Conservancy is just the container to hold this land so that any Wampanoag, regardless of their tribe or band, is welcome to that land and can spend time with their family, renew cultural practice undisturbed from the public. It is closed to the public. However, there are hundreds of acres of adjacent publicly accessible land to this site. And like I said, the Native Land Conservancy understands that we don't, the land doesn't belong to us. We're just this legal framework to be able to hold the land in common for the Wampanoag Nation. And there's just a couple of photos here of Jody Keegan interacting with a toad during a land restoration day, a group from our first Wampanoag convening, and a Wetu traditional lodge to promote, facilitate access to the site. And to tell you a little bit more about the ecology of the site, it's an Atlantic coastal plain pond system, which many of you know is a declining ecosystem type here in the Atlantic, but also globally. It is surrounded by 300 acres of densely forested woodlands. So it's kind of this stronghold of having some open meadows and grasslands within this landscape. It has kettle ponds, vernal pools. It has natural heritage endangered species, priority habitats. And as some of you know, the coastal plain pond system is a fire-adapted system. So with this very specialized ecosystem type, there's a lot of species that are specifically adapted to the site as well, making it a biodiversity hotspot. And this just shows a sliver of the biodiversity that's on this site and that we monitor and keep an care for. There are state-listed species that we are very careful to track. There's also other species that are more commonly found that we monitor through trail cameras so that we can passively see how they're using the land. We have bioacoustic monitors to help us record the calls of bat species and species that are audible to the human ear, like amphibians and birds. And we host an annual BioBlitz as well in August. So you can have your option of whether doing shoreline, shorebird, or terrestrial bioblitzes. But all of this is part of building those long-term data sets to be able to monitor species populations, giving us the opportunity to intervene if we do see rapid declines, and also look for those ecological shifts of habitat due to climate forces and such. So, we're very excited to be returning fire to this landscape this year, very shortly. This year is really built around building capacity and making sure that we have the training and the state regulations necessary to do this pilot burn at one of the fields at the Wampanoag Commonlands. And I should note that this is a DFG Biodiversity grant funded project, so thank you for helping us get going this first year. But this first pilot project is really just the first step in a longer-term vision. Over time, we're going to burn different fields within the site and be able to monitor how the land is responding to that. We also want to make sure that we collaborate with our partners who are burning coastal areas and other places where it's appropriate to return fire beyond the Wampanoag Commonlands. We heard earlier about the work that the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe is doing with returning fire to the landscape. I know that just last week, Crow's Pasture was also burned in Dennis. And these are all opportunities to work together and build up the workforce of fire practitioners, because we know that fire has been excluded for these landscapes for too long. And there are several benefits that we're excited about tracking and monitoring as we take on this project. Of course, maintaining a mixture of different habitat types. Like I mentioned, it's surrounded by 300 acres of densely forested habitats. And I love trees, but we know that grasslands are declining, and that's impacting our shorebird, our grassland birds, and other species that depend on those habitat types. So maintaining that diversity of habitat type is essential to climate change resiliency as well. Also to maintain the open sunlit shorelines that are characteristic of these coastal pond plain systems. It will also improve habitat for disturbance-adapted species that rely on those disturbances to reduce competition with other species as well. It provides an opportunity to reset the succession of the forest and that encroachment of those tree lines as well, and supports nutrient cycling in the soil, which supports our pollinators and so forth, the foundation of our ecosystems. And of course, we'll also reduce fire load and the risk of wildfires getting out of hand. So with that, I really just want to conclude with saying that we're looking forward to reporting out on the changes that we see on the landscape and carrying this forward to places beyond the borders of the Wampanoag Commonlands, but also just really encourage folks that when you're thinking about restoring balance and building resiliency and sustainability, that you're ensuring that you're including the Indigenous peoples and practices that belong to those lands. Thank you very much.